Thanks, Lynn. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to share my work with you all today. I will begin by discussing sharing my studies and the findings, and then I'll chat about the implications of my work as a whole. Due to time constraints, I will focus on implications for student education, and then I'll share my thoughts around the next steps post-PhD and a reflection on my PhD journey. I will take questions at the end. So yeah, let's get started. Now, we know that effective collaboration amongst different health professionals is essential to provide client-centered, high-quality care. Some universities respond by including interprofessional education within health professions curriculum. And by interprofessional education, I define it as, I take a commonly used definition, which is opportunities for individuals from two or more professions to come together to learn with, from, and about one another to improve collaboration as well as the quality of care provided. Now, the question is, are these initiatives, are these interprofessional learning initiatives delivering what they're supposed to deliver? I'm always wondering whether grads who enter the health workforce practice as individuals who have a real client-centered approach to care. Now, are they, in other words, are they committed to provide care interprofessionally? To seek answers, I decided to research or to study identity. Specifically, I was really interested in this construct of interprofessional identity. I was interested to find out what it is, how it might develop throughout health professions education, what is the relationship between interprofessional and professional identities. And yeah, I was really interested. And the reason why I picked identity was because when I started my PhD in about 2016, I noticed a prevalence of attitudes-based studies within the interprofessional field. Now, attitudes can be quite transient and fleeting, whereas identity is a lot more central. It's a more central construct to the self. So I explored interprofessional identity development from over an extended period that was from at various points from university entry all the way to the end of graduate's first year of professional practice. I explored identity through the through the lens of social identity theory. So I looked at social identity theory and intergroup contact theory. And essentially with this group of theories, I guess a key principle is that the identity or your sense of self is in part influenced by the social groups that you choose to belong to and the groups that you choose not to belong to. I used a mixed methods approach to studying identity, and I was, as stated here, really interested to find out what's the impact, does it matter, and how does this shape practice? In my candidacy proposal, I proposed 4 studies, but it very quickly exploded into 6. So essentially, my PhD project comprised a scoping review to find out what's known about interprofessional identity and professional identity within the interprofessional literature. And then I followed on with 5 empirical studies wherein identity was explored at various points from the start of first year all the way through to the end of grad's first year of practice. Now, yeah, so essentially it's a cross-sectional one, and I'll move on to talk about my findings. So did a scoping review, and this was my findings. So the interprofessional identity, when I started, there was no universal definition. There's no shared understanding of what it was or what its relationship with professional identity looked like. And any existing definitions, concepts, theories, and measures were poorly aligned. So by this I meant, when I went through the papers, I noticed that some papers would use the term interprofessional identity or their synonyms, for example, a dual identity or a professional identity with an interprofessional approach or slant, without defining what the term meant. In other papers, the authors, what I found was that they would propose a measure of identity and use it, but there wasn't the theoretical arguments behind it to support the choice of a particular measure. So in response to that, I proposed a definition of interprofessional identity that was based on social identity theory, and I'm happy to share that proposed definition with those interested. And then I developed and completed initial validations of a pair of identity measures. So I used an existing social identity measure and modified it and did CFA's confirmatory factor analysis on the modifications so as to create a pair of professional. So one of my measures would measure professional identity and another would measure interprofessional identity. What was unique about my measure was that we looked at identity as comprising 3 components, which was number 1, the cognitive aspect, which means your understanding of identity or knowledge of identity. And then there was the affective aspect and psychological aspect, which if I were to group them both together, which I'll expand on later, refers to, I guess, how frequently you would think of this identity. So how often would a particular identity come to the forefront of your mind? And another recommendation from my scoping review was to study identities over an extended period. In other words, that provided the justification for my empirical studies. So my first empirical studdy involved the aim in this study was to find out whether first-year students from, first-year students from medicine, nursing, and allied health, when they entered uni at the start of within the first 6 weeks, I was really interested to find out what their professional and interprofessional identity strengths look like. So wanted to know, did they have both identities? And if so, what sort of levels were they at? To put things in context, at Curtin, all first-year students participate in this faculty-wide interprofessional first-year program. And one of the key arguments for this is because in interprofessional literature, there is quite a fair amount of studies that support an early introduction of interprofessional education. And what I found was that students enter uni with high levels of professional and interprofessional identities. There were certain factors or predictors of stronger professional identities, and they are all on the slide here. So for professional identity, stronger or higher levels of professional identity was associated with quality of contact and positive perceptions of members from your own profession. Now, as for interprofessional identity, the predictors of stronger or higher level of interprofessional identity was quality of contact and females. Now, the other key finding here was that both identities were strongly correlated. So what this tells me is that students were entering first year with both professional and interprofessional identity, but they were not differentiating between both identities. So they identified as someone with both, and both identities, they regarded them as both being equally as important. So findings from this study support an early introduction of interprofessional education to support students to maintain or potentially strengthen their existing identities. By the end of the first year, now this is very interesting. What I found by the end of the first year was that there was a slight but significant drop in professional identity, and which is probably reflective of students by the end of the year getting a better understanding of what it means to be a future, whatever that profession was. But interestingly, there was a massive drop in interprofessional identity by the end of the first year. So this tells us that the interprofessional program was not delivering what it was supposed to deliver, because students complete the program and end up with weaker, significantly weaker interprofessional identities. An alternate argument or conclusion could be, hey, maybe when we talk about interprofessional identity, perhaps what a prerequisite could be that you have got students first need to develop a clear understanding of their role within an interprofessional context as a prerequisite for exploring how one might be able to work interprofessionally. The only profession that was exempt from this massive drop in interprofessional identity was nursing, and nursing students were the only, I guess, group of students who were involved in pracs in first year. So a hypothesis could be that students actually these nursing students gain a better understanding of what it means to work with other health professionals through these opportunities to observe healthcare providers working in team. And we also looked at some of the predictors, and quality of contact and perceptions of one's own perceptions was also associated with stronger interprofessional identity at the end of the year. Anyway, the findings are very interesting. Then I moved on to look at final year students. Now, I want to highlight that the final year students that we're talking about are from a different cohort to the first year students that were involved in my earlier two studies. So with that first year study, it was a pre-post design, so it was sort of the same cohort. And with the final year, that was of a different cohort. Now, I also want to highlight that the findings here needs to be interpreted with caution, because the study was really underpowered, as you can see from the extremely small sample sizes. And the reason for that was because it was really difficult. Recruitment was extremely difficult. It was really difficult, to get students, final year students who are really busy to participate. And it was also really difficult to then follow through. Like literally the post was completed 10 months from the first time point of collecting data for this final year students. So hence the small numbers. Nonetheless, I thought that the trends were quite interesting. Firstly, we saw that final year students entered final year with relatively high levels of professional and interprofessional identities. So this would suggest that something has happened in their second and third years. All our students at Curtin are involved in pracs as well. And so my thoughts was that somehow through their second and third year pracs and through informal socialization with other professions, somehow they gained a better understanding of what it means to work interprofessionally. And I think that could have contributed to high levels of interprofessional identity. And in this study, I was interested to find out whether placement type, I wanted to find out the relationship between placement type and identity strengths. So by placement type, I refer to students on just purely profession-specific placements. So for example, I'm a speech pathologist. In my final, as students in final year, some students will go on just purely, going to the health workforce, different healthcare settings to do speech pathology specific placements. Or the other option was profession-specific and at least one dedicated interprofessional placement. Now, dedicated interprofessional placements are placements that are run within university clinics, in schools, as well as a community health center in Perth. And dedicated interprofessional placements were placements where students had dedicated time to work and opportunities to work interprofessionally. And throughout their placement, they are supported by interprofessional facilitators who are university educators, as well as profession-specific, as well as clinical educators from the university, I guess from different schools, okay, that looks at the profession-specific aspect of their learning. So what we found was that for individuals who were involved in profession-specific placement, there's a large and significant increase in professional identity, and that's great because that's what placements are supposed to be about. Now, interprofessional identity, there was a small and non-significant decrease. Now, interestingly, for those involved in profession-specific and interprofessional, again, there was a medium and non-significant decrease in their interprofessional identity. So again, this sort of suggests that, well, because of small numbers, the data and the findings all we can conclude is that the findings support a replication of this study with adequately powered samples. But it might also suggest that there's something going on with interprofessional identity. It's not that straightforward. It's not like an outcome of an interprofessional placement, because clearly we can see that the data seems to suggest it doesn't really matter what type of placements you're on, your interprofessional identity is still going to be weaker. Yeah, so we thought that's interesting. By we, I mean me and my supervisors. Then I moved on to study interprofessional identity qualitatively. I was really interested to find out students' perceptions of an interprofessional identity. And with this one, I looked at their perceptions of identity at the end of a dedicated placement. Now, what I found really interesting was that with a lot of students that I interviewed, their instinctive reaction was, what? What do you mean? No, I haven't heard of the term. What do you mean by the term identity? No, I haven't heard of this term professional identity. Oh, that's a very hard question. I haven't heard of the term interprofessional identity either. So I thought that was really interesting. But when I sort of provided some prompts, like I said, identity is about, who you are, your sense of self. On further thought, they started describing practice. So that was quite interesting. So for example, with questions related to professional identity, they started telling me all about what they would do within their profession. And for interprofessional identity, they started describing interprofessional practice. So I was really focused on, now as I reflect on my work, I would say that, when I reflect back on my interviews, there was this huge focus on telling me what needs to be done. So it's almost like regurgitating textbook responses of interprofessional practice and the capabilities associated with this. There was literally very little, there was very little talk around why we need to work interprofessionally. In other words, there was very little reference to, well, we need to do it because I need to also understand how peers, my colleagues from other professions work. So the ability to take on perspectives of other professions appeared lacking. And so when I looked at the data, I concluded that dedicated interprofessional placements support interprofessional and professional identity developments. And for individuals to develop their interprofessional identity during the placement, it first involves developing cognitive ties to the identity. By that, I mean understanding what interprofessional practice is all about, learning about the capabilities associated with interprofessional practice. So sort of like getting your textbook technical knowledge. And then with that down pat, then we look into how would we then develop that innate intrinsic desire to want to be very client-centered in our approach. So that refers to affective and psychological ties. So in my paper that was published in relation to this study, I spoke about a cognitive shift wherein at the start of the placement, students told me that they were doing their prac or doing the dedicated prac to pass the placement. So it's like tick a box. I'm doing it because this is a prac that I've been assigned and I want to pass it. But then as they engaged in practice, and these pracs range from anywhere from 6 weeks to 12 weeks, depending on the profession and the nature of their course, they started, as the prac progressed, they started making sense of why it is so important as future health professionals to work interprofessionally. And what was clear was that although they were unfamiliar with these terms, by the end of the placement, they all graduated with they left the placement, completed the placement with a commitment with a client-centered mindset and the innate desire to want to deliver care interprofessionally. I recall one of my participants actually told me, Ruyi, interprofessional identity, it's like, she said, the difference is it's like playing in an orchestra. Professional identity is like you playing an instrument of choice. Interprofessional is like being in an orchestra. you have to sort of play your instrument in sync with everyone else in the orchestra in order to ensure that you create music that is of a much, I guess, in order to create music that that resonates with the audience, and sort of, she said, bring the output or the piece that you play to a much higher level, a level that can't be demonstrated by playing your instrument by yourself. So I thought, okay, that analogy was pretty spot on. So it's about working together in order to enhance the overall quality of service and what we provide our clients. Whilst students completed the placement with a client-centered mindset and commitment to interprofessional ways of working, they did highlight that there were context influence identity salience, and identity salience refers to the relative importance of one identity over the other. These were 3 factors that the students shared. So the team dynamics, access to shared workspaces, and the attitudes of individual health professionals towards students. One of my supervisors, my main one, said it'd be good to include drawings because she felt that identity is quite a complex construct that might not be, so it'd be good if students are able to draw. But I made it really clear that we're not analyzing drawings. It was more to illustrate and to strengthen the interview data. And this was one drawing which I thought was very interesting. I sort of identified closely with it. So the students drew 2 identities. In this drawing, she said, professional and interprofessional identities, they coexist. At times, they work together, they work in a complementary manner, but at other times, they could be in conflict. And she said, for example, if I was in a health placement on prac, I want to pass my prac, and if I'm faced with, say, another health professional, she said a doctor, who was quite anti-collaboration, I just felt like I can't really push it because I'm a student. So there's suggestions of power and hierarchy in play. Student versus qualified doctor who potentially would provide feedback to the clinical educator that might impact on potential ability to pass. So then she would say, I really want that client-centered mindset, but I feel, and I want to do, if it was me, if I had the say, I would have made different recommendations for my client. But I'm a student on prac and I'm working with health professionals who potentially might prefer not to work in a way that I've been taught at uni. So hence either, complementary or in conflict. Recommendations. So I recommended that we provide, that educators facilitate identity developments at uni by making it really explicit. So talking about what the term means, how that relates, and most importantly, how that relates to practice. I think students didn't quite get that. They were practicing, but hadn't realized that through practice, they're actually developing their identity, and that's why that's important. And then in the workplace, I recommended that we model, like health professionals model, interprofessional practice at work. And extending this further, it could also be a case of getting, I guess, clinical educators or placement facilitators to go to their counterparts in the workplace to say, thanks so much for taking on our students. We would also like, this is our agenda, and this is sort of the types of students that we would like to graduate at the end. Can we offer interprofessional training opportunities so that we can all be on the same page, and then we'll support you to perhaps model, feel comfortable, confident modeling a collaborative approach to work, so that our students will be able to see that consistency in approach at uni as well as in the workplace. Then I moved on to my final study, and in paper, the plan was now all of my students, participants in this final study, were participated in my previous study. Now, in theory, I had wanted to be able to interview all my students at all 3 time points. So in this study, I actually interviewed participants at 3 time points. First one being around about the 4-week mark from workforce entry, and then at the 6-month mark, and then at 12 months. Unfortunately, again, because of recruitment challenges, it was really difficult. Although I managed to recruit 8 people, I was unable to complete all 3 interviews with all 8 people. So data was really patchy. I probably had only about 1 or 2 whom I managed to interview at all 3 time points, and the rest was hit and miss. It was like, 6 months and 12 months, or 4 weeks, or 6 weeks and 12 weeks. With the help of my supervisors, we acknowledged that limitation and I analyzed data cross-sectionally, looking at trends over time rather than tracking changes in individual participants over time. From my data, I found that confidence practicing as professionals was a prerequisite for further identity developments. Grads entered the health workforce in the first 6 weeks, sort of identifying as a student or prac. In those first lot of interviews, a common theme that's coming through was grads telling me, oh gosh, practice is actually quite ambiguous and complex. And I immediately thought of my clinical educator and went, oops, there's no more clinical educators here. I have to try and sort it out myself, or speak to my colleagues, or chat to my supervisors. In other words, the grads in their first 4 weeks was really focused on working out, essentially, what am I employed to do? I really want to have a clear understanding of my role. And I want to feel confident knowing that when I make recommendations myself, without first cross-checking it with my clinical educators, they are sound, safe, and make sense. Now, the narrative shifted slightly during interviews at about the 6-month mark. By 6 months, it was really clear that a lot of grads were looking at ways within their role and within the perimeters of existing service delivery to modify how they deliver care in order to ensure that it is really client-centered. So I'll give you one example. One of my participants was a grad, so a speech pathologist working in an acute hospital in Singapore. She said that in this hospital, in the outpatient unit, the way how services are delivered is in uniprofessional sort of therapy sessions. So you do half an hour speech, followed by half an hour with another specialist. So what she did was she actually initiated contact with her colleague, who was an occupational therapist, for a client in common, and she told me that they booked in back-to-back sessions. And then what they did was, in the last 10 minutes of the speech session, and the first which corresponded to the last sort of 10 minutes of one session, they actually did like an overlap, a joint session. And I thought that was really creative. And she said that was really good, because with that short period of overlap, we will both be able to touch base on where we're up to with this client to ensure that our goals and approaches are complementary. And because of the way how, I guess, services were built, and in Singapore, what she told me was privately billing, the client ended up paying for like 2 individual therapy sessions, which aligns with sort of their service delivery model there. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, by the 12-month mark, it was really clear that those who identified and regarded both identities as equally important / salient were those who had a really sophisticated understanding of practice. And by that, I mean the ability to recognize and navigate barriers to interprofessional practice in their existing workplace and come up with solutions. In other words, the ability to adapt practice on the fly confidently without being told. So, for example, another grad that I interviewed was working in the army, in the Australian Army, and she said, well, I'm a physio and there aren't any other people there apart from medics and nurses. So if I see that this is clearly something beyond my scope, she said something about like an arm sling or whatever. I think it was something about like an arm injury. And she said, well, I suppose as a physio, I can do a little bit, but I acknowledge that I guess hands is probably more, I'm not really, OTs are probably more skilled and trained to work on stuff that involve hand injury. But given we're out in Whoop Whoop, and this is like out, yeah, in some remote army defense area, I suppose I can do a little bit, but then I would also make sure that I would liaise them and link them up with Queensland Health, and she's out in Queensland, so as to ensure that they receive or have the opportunity to receive input from an occupational therapist. Yeah, so I thought that was quite clever. So recommendations was that we need to have a clear understanding of your work role, and then provide lots of opportunities, and very loosely, similar to recommendations in the other previous study, which was, if embed and uphold the culture of providing care interprofessionally. So it's about that nurture aspect. When you're immersed in an environment that supports a certain way of working, I think we naturally will evolve and acclimatize to that sort of approach. So my main finding from my study was that for my project was that students, both professional and interprofessional identities coexist. Students enter uni with a really limited understanding of interprofessional identity. Interprofessional education courseworks and placements, they're important, and they facilitate both professional and interprofessional identity development. But at the 1 year mark, strong or ongoing identification with both identities is characterized by the ability to navigate, to adapt practice on the fly and adapt to ensure that care remains client-centered regardless of the practice settings that you're in. Implications. So again, focus on education. Identity, it's not an outcome. For those familiar with the identity literature, the reason why this was a key finding was because in a lot of the interprofessional literature, or the interprofessional identity is a relatively new concept within the interprofessional literature. For whatever reason, interprofessional identity or their synonyms have been portrayed as an outcome of an intervention, an interprofessional intervention. And what I've shown from my work is that it's not an outcome, it is always present, and it develops in a non-linear manner. Why is it non-linear? Because I would say, final year students, a 4.2 for a final year student is probably associated with a different understanding of identity, interprofessional identity, as compared to a first semester student with a similar rating on my identity measure. There's also no one right way. There are very different socialization experiences are equally valuable. And I think that was pretty evident when we saw that really high levels of identity at final year entry. So something must have happened. Educational research is messy. There could have been factors beyond that weren't accounted, that weren't explicitly studied in my study, that could have contributed to that high levels of identities. And likewise, there could have been factors not studied that could have contributed to that massive significant drop. So I think that in terms of an identity-focused curriculum, there really needs to be that shift away from an outcome, a modular approach, a systematic approach, or pass-fail. Let's put in this interprofessional learning experience, and the outcome is let's pass or fail. And instead focus on how can we support students to make sense of who they are and who they are going to be. How do we support students move from that sort of idealistic perception of who I might be at university entry, and most certainly in the interprofessional literature, that's how it's portrayed. That assumption that students choose, for example, to become a future speech pathologist because of a very uniprofessional, siloed approach of thinking that being a speech pathologist is much better than being a nurse or a doctor or a physio. So I think we really need to move away from that and focus instead of how do we support students to make sense of who they are and their practice and what that means. And what was really clear was that role clarity in each context is a prerequisite for exploring interprofessional practice. Please note that this differs from saying a well-developed professional identity, because identity development is an ongoing process and you can't really halt interprofessional identity development. What is well-developed professional identity? Again, it's pretty subjective. And numbers, they are, in isolation, they mean different things. So that's a sort of a summary of what I've just said. And I think this was sort of new thinking that's evolved this year, which was really that need, when we redesign learning experiences, yes, my work has identified certain factors. And one of it that was really prominent was quality of context. So quality interprofessional learning experiences versus quantity. So perhaps instead of a year-long course, yeah, we still introduce interprofessional learning education in first year, but maybe through like a one-off short course, focus on quality experiences as well as enabling students to get a really clear understanding of their role, their professional role. But essentially, overall, if we look at the curriculum, perhaps it's about how do we embed learning experiences that really support students to experience the interplay between both identities throughout their studies. How do they make meaning of it, and what these experiences might look like or mean, or realistically what is fundable, requires further research. I'm definitely open to ideas. In terms of explicit sort of strategies, first up, we really need to teach the notion of an identity. It's the same as, what's a cat? Define a cat. And then, if at all possible, include observational practice early in the curriculum. And then in second, third, fourth years, it's about how do we create or provide opportunities, focus on nurturing that interprofessional mindset that sort of ties in with, so that we can strengthen students, I guess, psychological affective ties to this identity, so that they innately just want to become interprofessional in approach. In other words, like myself, I see myself as a health professional who specializes in speech pathology work. And I think this is a very different mentality compared to seeing myself as a speech pathologist who is an expert who specializes in providing speech pathology practice. And yeah, so I said, that complex understanding, in my PhD, I said it was about learning to recognize, exploit, and respond to opportunities in different contexts to ensure care remains interprofessional. So next steps. Done some reading up. I'm wondering whether complexity science can inform identity developments. I'm really now thinking about the frequently quoted definition of interprofessional education, which was learning with, from, and about. I think that seems quite limited. I think my work suggests that we need to really focus on what happens during these interactions, that sort of organic, dynamic ability to adapt on the fly. I think that's sort of the next step. Systems-based, how are we teaching and assessing their students' understanding of identities? Can we move from that modular approach to a more dynamic approach? And what does that mean? To be honest, I don't know. At this stage, we're open to learning. I think moving away from, okay, early on in the curriculum, let's focus on coursework and, ticking and passing learning competencies. I think that might not be enough. And most certainly students that I interviewed in their third and in their final year, they were one or two said, oh, what was that? What interprofessional first year? No, it just went past me. I just didn't know it was, well, I suppose that's part of the course. So I signed up to it. It didn't make any sense whatsoever, because I really wanted to know what being a physio was. That was my focus. I didn't feel comfortable learning about others when I don't even know what I've signed up to become. Okay, so I think that's pretty telling. And likewise, can we do a little bit more in terms of supporting our partners in industry to help, I guess, educators advance our agenda of potentially, graduating grads who are client-centered and interprofessional in their approach. Yeah, before I take questions about my thoughts and my PhD research, I'll now move on quickly to talk about my experience. In short, I must admit, it was incredibly rich and diverse. I did my PhD part-time. On theory, in paper, I had 8 years, and I completed it with 2 years to spare. So I completed it in 5.5 years. How did I do it? I have absolutely no idea. I just did it. To me, it was a process of becoming a researcher. And I must admit that I'm extremely thankful to have a stable, consistent team of supervisors who are really experienced. My main supervisor was extremely experienced. I must be like student number 20 plus or whatever. But she never ever put on airs. Like, she always saw me as a person. They really cared about my well-being. At one point, they actually say, "Hey, Ruyi, you can actually afford to take a break. You can actually afford to rest because you're progressing at quite at a rate that's equivalent to a full-timer." Yeah, they were really caring, and I guess there was psychological safety and trust. And because of that trust, every time I came across an opportunity, I would always run them past my supervisors, and if they say yes, I'll pursue it. If they say no, I would probably give it a miss. I think and they also set really clear standards right from the start. I remember in my very first meeting, my main supervisor told me all the clear timelines. She said, expect a 1-week turnaround for feedback. Don't ever, and I still remember this, don't ever be bamboozled out of first author position. It didn't mean anything to me back then, but now I understand why. And yeah, she was really good. Like, she even provided opportunities for me to become a peer reviewer. With my first paper, she actually offered to assist. And then I guess through networking, through sort of doing my work and focusing on my work, other opportunities came up. I had opportunities to teach at a level A lecturer role with ECU, Edith Cowan Uni, within their speech pathology curriculum. I wrote lectures as well in an area that I'm passionate about, which was complex communication, supported unit development, published, dealt with rejections, learned to deal with feedback objectively, won a student prize, applied for tiny grants successfully, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. And I even had opportunities to co-supervise a group of honours students. At Curtin, they were doing group honours as part of their undergrad program to completion. And we do have a paper that is currently revised and resubmitted, so pretty excited. I guess for me, what was really helpful was also remaining in practice throughout my journey. That enabled me to see both sides of the coin. And as I looked at my research findings, I went, yeah, I can totally understand and see why practice is hard, why there are these identity shifts and transitions from, being a student to a qualified professional. And I think that was helpful. But the flip side was I also had to watch myself, because there was that bias that could have come through. When I look at my data and go, yeah, of course, it's going to suggest this because of my experiences of practice. So I really had to watch that bias. I also scheduled time. Like, I put in dedicated time into my routine, and above all, I enjoyed the experience. I think that's it. And these were my publications. Yeah. Okay, open to questions now.
Thank you, Ruyi.
No worries.